Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be looking at sounds from hell. And we're going to be creating some dark music, and I want to just give you some different techniques you can use to create dark audio that's meant to be intense and driving and those sorts of things. But let's start off with an example. So here I've got an example. It's 100% sounds from hell, and there's only one sound that has a verb on it, and that's the only processing. It's this one right here. Besides like volume automation and stuff. So let's go ahead, let's take a listen, and then we'll dive into the techniques in the library itself. It's by Red Room Audio, and let's picture something scary while listening to this. Here we go. That's it. So we're going to dive into the techniques. First, let's do a brief overview of the library so that you understand kind of what we're working with here. So I'm using exclusively the Sounds from Hell library, and it's broken into two separate libraries. There's the ambience and underscore. This is like pads, tonal things, atmospheric kind of stuff. Stuff's to establish a mood. This is also where the pulses live. So that patch that you heard at the beginning, which is this one. There's a bunch of pulses, and both libraries have the same interface. So you've got like an envelope here. So if you want things to come in suddenly or not, you can do that. You've also got a gate that you can use and a filter. So really straightforward interface. The audio is really the main focus of the library, which is really nice to see. So the blue keys will select different loops or different samples, I should say. And then the green key will set the pitch. Versus, we go down. We go up. So you're able to set the pitch this way, and then you can choose between different banks of samples here. So if we come over here, this is a different sample than say this one. So you can see we could choose between our different loops just like that. This is true. This is pretty much how both of the libraries work. So you've got your pulses here. On this one, we've got our soundscapes. This is these are just sort of sounds that you can have running in the background. Sometimes you can reverb them out, and that can sound really cool. We'll talk about some of that stuff in a second. You got your pads. These are tonal sounds. These actually can also sound, besides sounding really dark and scary, they can actually sound really peaceful as well. And that's something we're going to talk about. You got your Brahms. Okay, so this is where we start diving into the other library. So you've got your hits and transition libraries as well. So these are like your impact sounds, your booms, your Brahms, all that kind of stuff. So again, same interface and layout, but you get stuff like that instead. You got your pulses, which the pulses, this is actually part of the first library, another pad and another pad. For a lot of the booms and things, what I chose to do is you can actually just go right to the sample tab and add it to your DAW, depending on how your DAW does this. And so if we come in, that's what I chose to do. So you've got your ambience and underscore. So if you want to work with the pad samples directly in your DAW, you can do that. Maybe you have some great way of doing stuff with them that's unique to your DAW, or maybe a particular plugin you'd like to use it with, maybe a granular synthesizer or something. And then you've also got the hits and transitions. And I chose, as you can see, to do a lot of that stuff here. So for example, we've got this sort of a transition. We've got a boom right here. Yeah. All right, so let's dive into some of the techniques here. Let me just show you the folder structure. So it's a really nice folder structure, pretty straightforward. And they've also got them all forward and reversed. So it's kind of nice if you hear something forward that you like, you can get the reverse and drag it right in. Easy as pie. Okay, so let's start off with creating an atmosphere that's going to be, quote unquote, intense, scary. Immediately, I thought we're going to need a pulse sound. So I settled on this pulse sound right here. So this is the pulse sound. It's just the same thing. It's just the same sample over and over and over. Just going through the sample, and then this is just for the pitch. So that's coming down. That's laying down a bass for us to sort of vibe off of, and it's mostly mids and highs. There's not really any low end on that, and that makes it really easy to work with so that when you do want an impact, you have room to put one in there. And the nice thing about a loop like this is it leaves a lot of room. So when you want things to get more intense, besides just adding an impact, you can add in something that does have some low end. So I chose to start out kind of thin here, but if we come over here and listen to this, and let's just take out all the hits and stuff, you can hear a second one come in, and that's this pulse number 2, this guy. And this is largely responsible for that extra little like, oh, something's happening, what the heck's going on right here vibe. So that's my first one for you. Start out thin and add layers. It works out great pretty much every time. Fantastic. Now for the ambient sounds, you'll notice there's a couple key ones. And when I'm talking about these, I'm talking about the pads specifically. So we'll get to the atmospheric sounds after this. So we've got these chords playing. And with the chords, what's important about these guys is that they have sort of off harmonies. Harmonies are a bit weird. They come in, they come out, but none of the harmonies are quite nice. The minor third is the nicest one I have in here. If you come over here to when the pads come in, another pad. Yeah, that one. That one is this one. And you can see we've got a minor second rubbing up against each other, just creating this like, kind of a feeling. And that's great. That's exactly what I want. Now I'm also automating the volume on this to bring it in slowly over time as opposed to just having it show up. So we get this sort of creeping feeling as it comes in, which that's just a choice of what you want to do. Do you want to shock them with a big chord out of nowhere, or do you want to just creep it in like that? I went for the creep it in viewpoint. After that, and using those pads, we go ahead and I started thinking, well, how can we fill this out a bit more? Let's get more of a space. And we come to things like these soundscapes that we have coming on over here. So we've got this one, and then I treated a riser also. So let's dive into these things. So, and this sort of goes in with the hits. The way these soundscapes work is right. They're going to be just some vague location. Like for example, if I just do this one here, turn on its audio. Okay, so it's actually loud the whole time, but I'm automating the volume because these sounds are just going to be loud. You're going to need to turn them down and put them and sort of set them in their place as you would. You know, you got to mix it in. These I have just sort of come in, and then with some atmospheres, what I like to do besides just layering them is I like to have them suddenly exit. When they exit, they leave a lot of like, what the heck just left, because they're very broad spectrally. There's a lot of really crazy spectral stuff going on. It's more similar to noise than it necessarily is to a tone. And so when this leaves, you feel something left. It like leaves a huge hole, but it's like over the whole spectrum. So it has this really like rhythmic effect, but it's also kind of disorienting when something like this grows and then just disappears out of nowhere. So that's what I was going with here. Another thing you could do is you could drag this over and blend the two right here and get a continuous sound that way if you want to. This one over here kind of plays a similar role. So this helps to build and adds a swell, and it just naturally comes in. So I layer a couple of these in. Sometimes I'll have upwards of 10 to 20 of these things, and I'll be volume automating them all on and off at different times just to create a really unique thing. Other times you can just drag one or two in and just, you know, fit them in according to what you like. But that's another way that I really like to use atmospheres, is just to have them come in, and besides just establishing a soundscape, also use them to establish like entrances and exits of moments. So once I had these sort of in place, I began to look at other cues I'd like to hit a little harder. And so this is where we come in a little more rhythmically. So for example, I have this whoosh transition here. So this really just serves to get us to this boom sound. I didn't want the boom sound to be something that was just all of a sudden there. If we get rid of this, which is the Alt command, it just kind of shows up. It still sounds fine. Like, it still works, but just having the transition there helps you sort of push into it. And that's something that I wanted that way. I didn't want to shock him there because I had this moment coming up. Also notice that things leave on weird beats. Like, this leaves on beat 4 instead of the downbeat of 11. So this is off-putting. And that's another great thing you can do when you're doing stuff like this, is you still want to emphasize major downbeats and stuff, usually, to give them some sense of direction of where you're going. But you also want to throw things in there that just exit and enter at weird points. So you've got weird harmonies, stuff that's creeping in. It's kind of ambiguous. Sounds that suddenly just show up and build, and then they leave at weird moments. But there are still things like impacts and things like these little boomy bits that come in on downbeats. So there's still a sense of where stuff is going, and the pulse is really what's holding us all together. So there's those two pulse sounds that just tie the whole thing together. And so after that, it's just sort of looking where I want to add in these boomy bits. We've got this nice low end, and since we have all this stuff going on up here, this is just gonna, one of the best parts about dark audio is you can have a lot of stuff going on down there in the low end, and it still tends to be pretty awesome because you want that muddy, moving stuff going on down there. Not all the time, but having stuff like this. If you've got subs, you're gonna feel that, and it's gonna be awesome, especially if it's loud. So this kind of stuff is just always... It's really, really fun to layer in. And because we've got mostly a high-end thing going on here, when we do stuff like this, it's really going to have an impact on the listener. We have another one over here as well. Just trying to keep that low-end movement going. And for this one, this actual one was added in near the end because I wanted to build. And you can see there's some volume automation builds here in the background. And they build and build. There's two big swells and then one like extra big swell that involves the use of these two risers, and then all of a sudden it all just cuts off. And that was the ending I was going for. Something that just builds crazy, you turn around and you find out, I don't know, maybe there is a really scary thing there and there'd be another cue with a massive hit or something, or maybe it's just nothing. They turn around and there's nothing there. And you're sitting there on the edge of your seat, and it's like, oh, it's the worst feeling, man. So anyways, there we go with that. Now, one other thing, I want to talk about these riser sounds. So with the risers, I always, when I'm listening to risers, the volume profile you get is almost never the volume profile you're going to want in your track. And this just tends to be how it is with everything. This is not a problem with these particular samples. This is just in general, I am almost never happy with the initial volume profile. So I almost always come in and add in another volume automation and sort of recurve it. So it'll fit better with how it crawls in. So see here, it's basically you can't hear anything. So stuff like this. So when you're listening, when you audition samples, keep in mind the volume changes that you're probably going to do. You might actually find that something that's got a lot more going on near the end of the sample will actually work out pretty all right. If the beginning of the sample has too much, remember, you can always volume automate it. Another thing I do if I'm trying to tame something that's got movement, when I listen to these, I listen a lot more for, besides just spectrally, like what's happening, like how much high end and low end there is. I also listen for the kinds of movements, because movements are kind of hard to, if you want to synthesize and add the movements in yourself, that's just really time consuming. So if it's got a good movement, I'm willing to automate an EQ, which is often way easier. Automate some low pass, high pass kind of business, or maybe a peaking filter. Doing that kind of a thing also is a great way to really rein in samples and get them to do pretty much exactly what you want. And then the last one here that I think is just kind of a cool side bit is this one I put some reverb on, and you can see there's some volume automation here. And this volume automation is here for exactly the same reason this one's here. But this was originally a much longer riser. Like this was way longer, and it got just really crazy near the end. But I really like the tone that it had right there. And so I decided to just reverb it out. And if we come in here and pull the reverb off, that was it. So I just decided to add a reverb, pump the reverb way up. So it just rings on and on and on, just like that. And you just get a really nice sort of background cue sound. If there was something happening visually, it would work really well right there. I mean, I didn't write to a specific film or anything, so it wasn't anything that I had to consider. But it's always fun to add these kinds of elements in there. Really adds a lot of just kind of like a feeling that something's going on. And yeah, so there you go. There is some different techniques. So again, we've got the layering. This was kind of obvious. It's true for everything, but keeping it mostly high end at the beginning and then adding in the low end for that extra intensity. Heavier hits and rhythms sort of happen in odd spots. Have dissonant harmonies, things like minor seconds. The minor third there, I would argue is not actually all that dissonant, but it sets a mood, and I didn't want to go all dissonant at the very beginning. So dissonant harmonies. And when it comes to the atmospheric stuff, remember this can hold value rhythmically. They can introduce visual cues if you're working with a piece of film. And if you have something that you like what's there, keep in mind you can always automate an EQ or a volume curve to get it to fit exactly where you want. A lot of times it's very overbearing, I tend to find, when I'm searching for samples, but it's really easy to take stuff back. I think it's harder to add stuff in via distortion than it is to take an overbearing sample and sort of tone it back to exactly what you want. So yeah, and this is all 100% except for that one reverb, just straight up coming straight out of Sounds from Hell. There's 2 amazing walkthroughs that they've got on Red Room Audio's YouTube channel that you can go check out if you're interested in picking up this library. Really, really nice. And one thing that I will say here at the very end is the reversal feature they have here. I love that. It is so easy to work with. And the other thing I really like is how the end snaps to like meaningful points. It's not just like continuous. So you get all these like useless middle points. It snaps to somewhere that makes sense to snap to. And I really appreciated the fact that it worked like this, because it makes selecting a region so much easier to do than trying to like snap it to some very specific setting. It can be really challenging sometimes. And I just appreciated that detail. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos. And have a blessed day.